Pause before we go anywhere else. Meghan Markle is in Montecito right now. And somewhere in that house, someone has already seen the confirmation, the wedding guest list, every name in the royal family, and Harry's is not on it. While she tests a new sizing chart on the As Ever website, hoping no one notices it before it disappears, while the next product announcement waits in someone's inbox for the right moment, the family she helped cost her husband has finalized its invitation list for the biggest royal celebration of this year. And what that list says is the clearest signal this family has sent in a very long time. May the 19th, 2026, confirmed by People magazine, by Hello magazine, by The Sunday. Peter Phillips, the grandson of Queen Elizabeth, the cousin who once stood between William and Harry at the Duke of Edinburgh's funeral because he was trusted by both of them equally, is getting married on June the 6th in the Cotswolds. King Charles is attending, Queen Camilla, William, Catherine, Zara and Mike Tindall, Beatrice, Eugenie, the whole family, and Harry's name is not on the list. Tonight, three chapters. Chapter one, the wedding that made it official, and what this guest list actually tells us about where the young royals stand. Chapter two, the moment it all ended, a specific afternoon in June 2022 outside St. Paul's Cathedral that most people missed, and that veteran royal correspondent Dan Wootton, who was standing there himself, did not. Chapter three, what comes next? Because if you think this is the only door that closes this summer, I need you to stay with me. This is commentary and analysis. Everything in this video draws from confirmed reporting by named outlets and the eyewitness account of a correspondent who was personally present at the events described. It is not presented as private or confirmed insider knowledge. By the time we close tonight, you will see that June the 6th is not the end of a chapter for Harry and Meghan. It is the opening line of a new one. And the story it is beginning is one you have been watching build for years. Royal correspondent Dan Wootton has been covering this family for decades. He was there for the good moments and the difficult ones. He was in the building on days that the rest of us read about the following morning. And this week, speaking on his Outspoken channel about the confirmation that Harry and Meghan will not be attending Peter Phillips's June wedding, he said something that deserves more attention than it has received so far. He said that the decision by the young royals to side with William over Harry is, in his words, absolutely categorical. Not likely, not probably, categorical. I want to spend a moment with that word because it carries real weight. Categorical means there is no room left for interpretation, no gray area, no quiet door being held open, no polite ambiguity maintained for the benefit of the cameras. It means a line has been drawn, the people on either side of it have chosen where they stand, and that choice is settled. Royal News Network commentator Brittany Provance, speaking alongside Wootton this week, offered what I found to be the most clarifying explanation for why this is happening. She said, if Harry and Meghan are there, it is not a happy occasion anymore. It is stressful, it is tense. You have to manage so much because you cannot say and do certain things around Harry and Meghan. You do not know if it will show up in the next Netflix production or the next interview cycle or the next book. Read that slowly if you need to. This is not an anonymous source speaking from the shadows. This is a royal commentator describing with real precision what it actually feels like to share a room with Harry and Meghan in 2026. And the people at the center of this week's story, Peter Phillips, Zara Tindall, their partners, have clearly arrived at the same calculation on their own. Now, I want to take you back because to understand what this wedding confirmation actually means, you need to understand what Peter Phillips and Harry once were to each other. These are not two people who drifted apart the way old acquaintances do, losing contact slowly across years of separate lives in different cities. These are two men who grew up inside one of the most unusual families in the world, royal events in childhood, Trooping the Colour, Christmas gatherings at Sandringham, Easter at Balmoral, the private calendar of a family whose life is lived, in part, on a stage, and whose members understand instinctively that no one on the outside will ever quite grasp what that means. In 2008, Harry attended Peter's first wedding to Autumn Kelly, He was there with his then girlfriend, Chelsea Davy, a young man at a family celebration, relaxed, belonging. That was what Peter and Harry were to each other. And then there was April 2021, the Duke of Edinburgh's funeral, a moment of such heightened tension with William and Harry barely speaking and the cameras of the world trained on every interaction that the family made a deliberate decision about who would walk where. They placed Peter Phillips between the two brothers, not a senior aide, not a palace official, Peter, because he was trusted by both of them at one of the most fragile moments the family had faced publicly in years. That word, trusted, I keep returning to it. And yet, according to a source speaking to Hello Magazine this week, the official explanation for why Harry has not received a wedding invitation is that the two of them have not spoken for several years and have simply lost touch. Simply lost touch. Honestly, I find that phrase remarkable, not because it is entirely without truth. Relationships do cool, distance does accumulate, but these are not two men who exchanged numbers at a conference and never followed up. This is a person who was physically placed between Harry and his brother at their grandfather's funeral because his presence, specifically his presence, was the one that could be trusted to hold things steady. You do not simply lose touch with that person. You make an assessment about who they have become, what being around them requires of you, and you decide accordingly. Per recent reporting from Hello People magazine and The Sun, every significant member of the royal family will be at this wedding on June the 6th. King Charles, Queen Camilla, William, Catherine, Zara and Mike, Edward and Sophie, Beatrice and Eugenie, the whole family. And Harry will not. Look, if you have been watching this story with any real attention over the past 4 or 5 years, none of this surprises you. Your instincts about what was quietly happening inside this family were correct. You could see it forming in the body language and the silences, in the careful diplomatic language that began to replace genuine warmth. And what this week's confirmation gives us is not entirely new information. It is the public record finally catching up with what was already true. But here is what I want to show you next. And I need you to stay with me for this. There was a specific day, a specific location, a moment in June of 2022 outside a cathedral in London when the young royals did not gradually drift away from Harry and Meghan. They made a choice actively in real time. And Dan Wootton, the correspondent who just called this outcome absolutely categorical, was standing there when it happened. That is where we go next. There is a story that the British royal family has told itself quietly for the better part of 90 years. It is not written anywhere official. It does not appear in palace statements or constitutional documents, but it shapes every major decision that institution makes when one of its members begins pulling away from it. The story begins in 1936. Edward VIII had been king for less than a year when it became clear that he intended to marry Wallis Simpson, an American, twice divorced, a woman the establishment considered entirely unsuitable for a queen consort. The king was told, plainly, that the marriage could not happen while he sat on the throne. He chose the marriage anyway. In December of 1936, he abdicated. His younger brother stepped into a role he had not prepared for and had never wanted. And Edward was given a title, the Duke of Windsor, and quietly removed from the life he had always known. What followed was not a dramatic falling out. There was no single confrontation, no public break, no statement of severance. What happened instead was a slow, methodical distancing. His mother, Queen Mary, maintained what was described at the time as a polite but permanent coldness toward him. His family continued, carried on, built something durable without him. When his niece was crowned Queen Elizabeth II in 1953, Edward was not in Westminster Abbey, not because he was physically prevented from attending, because the invitation was not extended. He died in 1972, having spent the final decades of his life in a kind of gilded irrelevance, celebrated in certain circles abroad and largely forgotten by the institution that had once centered on him. The royal family learned something from 1936 that it has applied with varying degrees of patience ever since. When someone chooses an outside relationship over the institution, over the quiet expectations of loyalty and discretion, you do not chase them. You do not publicly condemn them. You continue, you build, you signal, slowly and without drama, that life inside the family goes on without them. And eventually, the signals become impossible for anyone watching to misread. I want you to hold that pattern in your mind for a moment because we are going to come back to it now. Before we get to what happened in June 2022, I want to bring in a voice that I think carries particular weight here. Angela Levin spent years documenting Harry's life as his authorized biographer. Her book, published in 2018, was written with his cooperation, with access to people close to him, with a genuine attempt to understand who he was before the decisions that followed came to define him publicly. What she has observed since, across multiple interviews and appearances, is what she has characterized as a transformation that she finds genuinely difficult to reconcile with the person she spent those years researching. The Harry she came to know, as observers close to the project have noted, was generous in his commitments, deeply loyal to the military community he had served alongside, and genuinely invested in his family. Not performatively, actually, the shift, as she has described it, coincides with a single period in his life. Look, I am not going to tell you this is a surprise to anyone who has been paying attention. What Levin is describing carefully and with the authority of someone who knew him before is a pattern that those of us watching from the outside have been tracking for years. You noticed it too. The Harry who walked behind his grandmother's coffin in September 2022, who flew in and flew out of his father's coronation in May 2023 on the same day, um, who has published a memoir detailing private conversations and private moments in language that the people he was speaking about had no opportunity to review or respond to. That Harry is, according to those who knew him well before all of this, what has been characterized as almost unrecognizable. That is not my framing. That framing comes from people who liked him, people who wanted genuinely for his story to go differently. Here is what I find important about that. When the people who were rooting for you begin describing you in those terms, it tells you something, not about them, about the distance you have traveled. Lady Colin Campbell, the royal biographer and commentator who has followed this family with considerable closeness over many years, has long argued, per her analysis of the Sussex trajectory, that the isolation Harry now finds himself in is not reversible in the current circumstances. That the family, as she has put it, across multiple platforms, made a quiet assessment of the situation some time ago. And that the behavior they observed, the books, the interviews, the documentaries, the steady weaponization of private family moments for commercial purposes made a certain kind of distance, not just understandable, but necessary. I want to be clear about what I am and am not saying here. I am not saying the royal family is blameless in every dimension of this story. Families are complicated, institutions can be cold, and Harry's account of his own experience is, at its foundation, his account to give. But what I am saying is this: when you look at what Peter Phillips did this week, when you look at that guest list, when you hold it against the 1,936 pattern this family absorbed and has never forgotten, something comes into focus that is hard to look away from. We are not watching a relationship that simply faded. We are watching a pattern that the royal family has executed before. And in the next chapter, I am going to show you exactly where that pattern crystallized, the specific afternoon it became irreversible, and why Dan Wootton standing outside St. Paul's Cathedral in June 2022 saw something that most of the world missed entirely. The 3rd of June 2022, the Platinum Jubilee service of Thanksgiving at St. Paul's Cathedral, London. Queen Elizabeth II, in the final months of her life, was unable to attend the service herself. Her family gathered in her honor. Senior royals, extended family, dignitaries, the cameras of the world, because this was a public occasion and the world was watching. Harry and Meghan were there. They attended the service. And what happened that day according to Dan Wootton, who was standing outside the cathedral and observed it directly, was the moment the young royals made their decision, not a private decision, reached quietly over dinner or in a phone call weeks later, a real time decision in public, in front of witnesses. Here is what Wootton described. Harry and Meghan did not take the shared transportation that the rest of the family group used to travel to the post service event. They arrived separately. They were seated away from the senior royals, a seating arrangement that, as long-time correspondents who covered that day have noted, reflected a deliberate choreography about proximity and precedence. And then outside the cathedral, as the family gathered to move on together, Zara Tindall and Mike were waiting near the van. And Harry and Meghan, per Wootton's first-hand account, approached them, tried to start a conversation. The response they received was, in Wootton's description, a clear and unmistakable signal. Zara and Mike did not want to engage. They had made their assessment and they were not concealing it. Wootton, who has reported on this family for years and was personally present that afternoon, has said this plainly. It was at that point when the younger royals decided there was nothing reasonable about what Harry and Meghan were doing, that they were acting as though they were better than the family they had chosen to leave, and that the time for pretending otherwise had passed. I want to pause here because I think this moment is more important than the amount of coverage it received at the time. This is not a leak from a palace briefing. This is not an anonymous source with an unclear agenda. This is a named correspondent standing in the street describing what he saw with his own eyes. And what he saw was Zara Tindall, who grew up alongside Harry, who shared those Sandringham Christmases and Balmoral summers, making a visible, public, real time choice not to close the distance. That is the 2022 line. That is where it crystallized. This is commentary and analysis. And I want to be clear about that as we move through this section. What I am describing is a pattern as it has been reported and observed by named correspondents, not a statement of private confirmed knowledge. Read it accordingly. Now, here is the pattern laid out plainly. 1936. A member of the royal family chose an outside relationship over the institution. The family continued. Signals sent. Distance formalized over years. 2022, a member of the royal family arrived at his grandmother's Jubilee, declined the shared van, failed the social temperature test outside St. Paul's, and watched the young royals make their collective decision in real time. 2026, a wedding guest list confirms what has been quietly true for 3 years. The Cascade does not announce itself, it accumulates. And by the time the public record catches up with it, the people inside the family have already moved on. Here is the detail that, honestly, I find the most clarifying of everything in this story. Beatrice and Eugenie are on the guest list. The York sisters, whose father, Prince Andrew, was arrested earlier this year, whose family name carries, at this precise moment in history, what has been characterized by multiple outlets as the most significant reputational burden in the British royal family. Even they received an invitation. The King, her reporting from the Sun's royal editor, Matt Wilkinson, always wanted both sisters to remain part of the family. And so they are attending. This is the signal, not the invitation to Harry that did not arrive, the invitation to Beatrice and Eugenie that did. Because what it tells you is that this is not a blanket decision to keep difficult family members at a distance. It is a specific decision about Harry and Meghan. The family has weighed what different relationships cost them, and the calculation has landed where it has landed. If your instincts about this told you years ago that the young royals had already made up their minds, that the warmth you could see draining out of those public interactions was not accidental, that the careful diplomatic language replacing genuine contact was telling you something real, you were right. Stay with me, because the next chapter is where I want to give you my honest assessment of what this summer actually looks like now and what I believe is coming next. Before I share what I genuinely believe this means going forward, I want to be clear that this section is my honest analysis. It is interpretation built from the confirmed facts we have already walked through together. That is all it is. And I think it is worth saying plainly before I give it to you. When I think about this story, and I have been watching it for a long time now, what strikes me most is not the wedding invitation. What strikes me is the quiet. When relationships break down inside families, there are usually two kinds of endings. There is the loud kind, the confrontation, the statement, the lawyers, the public declaration that a line has been crossed and crossed permanently. And then there is the quiet kind, the kind where nothing is formally announced, nothing needs to be, and the guest list does the work that no one wants to do publicly. This family has always preferred the quiet kind. And I think that is important to understand because it means that what we are seeing this week is not an eruption, it is a confirmation. The decision was made a long time ago. We are only now seeing the paperwork. Here is the thing. When I lay out the thread of the last 4 years, it reads very clearly. June 2022, the van at St. Paul's, the cold shoulder from Zara and Mike, the young royals drawing their line in real time. January 2023, Spare, published, a book that put private conversations, private grief, private family moments into the public record for commercial distribution. May 2023, the coronation at which Harry flew in and flew out on the same day, not because of a scheduling conflict, but because the temperature inside that building on that day made a longer stay untenable. And now, May 2026, a wedding confirmation that removes any remaining ambiguity about where Peter Phillips stands. Each of those moments is a dot, and when you connect them, the line they form is not complicated. I want to say something about Harry specifically, and I know some of you will push back on this, and that is absolutely fair. Um, Honestly, when I think about him, I do not primarily feel anger. I feel something closer to sadness, not because I think he is blameless in any of this. I do not. The book was a choice, the interviews were choices. Every decision to take a private family moment and turn it into content was a choice that had a cost. And the cost was paid by the relationships that are now reflected in a wedding guest list. But I also think about a man who grew up in an extraordinary and genuinely difficult set of circumstances, who lost his mother at 12 years old in a way the whole world watched, who spent years navigating a public role that came with real pressure and real limitation, and who made a series of decisions under the influence of a relationship that has, as those who knew him before it consistently describe it, changed him in ways that are difficult to reverse. That is not an excuse. It is a context. And I think the context matters even when the conclusions are hard. Peter and Harry have not spoken for several years. Simply lost touch. I keep coming back to those four words: simply lost touch. The framing that Hello Magazine used, drawing on a source close to the couple. And I understand why that framing exists. You cannot have a wedding invitation story that reads like a verdict. You smooth it, you make it sound natural. You use the language of drift rather than the language of decision. But look at what we have established tonight: a man who stood between two brothers at a funeral because his presence, specifically his presence, was the one that could hold that moment together. And now, per the official line, they have simply lost touch. The distance between those two sentences is not drift. It is a decision that has been phrased as drift because decisions are uncomfortable and drift is not. To be fair, and I want to be honest about this, there are those who point out that King Charles himself has maintained what appears to be a softer position on Harry than the younger generation has. Reports suggest there remains some emotional connection, some residual channel that has not been formally closed, and if accurate, that distinction matters. A father's softness for a son is a real thing, even when the son has made choices the father cannot fully support. But Charles is not Peter Phillips. Charles is not Zara Tindall. Charles will not be king forever, and the generation that follows him has already made its calculation. The family that Harry will eventually need to find his way back to, if he ever does, is not Charles's family. It is William's. And William's family has in the words of a correspondent who was standing in the street when it happened, made its position absolutely categorical. In the next chapter, I want to show you what the summer ahead actually looks like, not as speculation, as a pattern that is already visible in what we know. And I want to tell you what I believe comes next and why I think the June the 6th wedding is not the last signal this season sends. Here is what the summer looks like. June the 6th, Peter Phillips's wedding in the Cotswolds confirmed. Every significant member of the royal family in attendance. Harry not among them. That part we know. That part is on the record. Later this year, and this is where the pattern becomes something more than a single data point, reports suggest that the Prince and Princess of Wales are expected to travel to India for the Earthshot Prize. Catherine has attended this event before. Boston in 2022 was the last time. Her absence in 2023 was attributed publicly to concerns about Prince George's schedule, though with the knowledge of what we know now about her health in the months that followed, that explanation sits differently in retrospect. Italy last week was, according to those covering the trip, a significant and successful step outward. And if the India trip proceeds as currently anticipated, it will represent something meaningful in the public rehabilitation of the working royals as a unit. Is there any indication that Harry will be involved in the Earthshot Prize this year in India in any capacity? Per recent reporting, there is none. Not a suggestion, not a rumor, nothing. Christmas 2026. The family will gather as it does at Windsor or Sandringham, following a tradition that is held through wars, abdications, bereavements, and every category of family difficulty the 20th and 21st centuries have produced. Per long-standing royal practice and current reporting, there is no expectation of Harry and Meghan being present. There has not been for some time. And in 2027, royal commentator Brittany Provence, speaking this week, offered a prediction I found interesting. She suggested that a major international tour, possibly to Australia with the children, remains something she expects Catherine and William to build toward, perhaps in 2027 when the conditions are right. A tour of that scale, with the Wales children representing the future of the monarchy in one of its most important Commonwealth realms. Picture for a moment what that story looks like, the coverage it generates, the photographs, the narrative of continuity and warmth, and an institution that has found its footing again after years of difficulty. That story will dominate the conversation for months, and Harry and Meghan will watch it, as Brittany put it, from Montecito. I want to connect the dots clearly because I think this is the part of the story that is most important and least often said plainly. 2022, the van at St. Paul's. The young royals draw their line. 2023, Spare published. The line becomes a wall. 2023, the coronation. Harry flies in, flies out, is photographed in a side seat. 2024, the Nigerian tour, what has been characterized by observers as an attempt to replicate the format and authority of a working royal tour without the institutional backing that makes that format meaningful. 2025, as ever launches the lifestyle brand, the jams and the honey and the carefully curated image of domestic contentment in a California house. 2026, a wedding guest list in the Cotswolds, and every name in the family except one. Each year, one more door. Each year, one more confirmation. And each year, the distance between where Harry and Meghan are and where the people who once trusted them are becomes slightly more visible, slightly more formal, slightly more difficult to describe as anything other than what it is. This is not a story that happened to Harry and Meghan. It appears to be the accumulated result of choices made repeatedly and consistently that the people around them assessed and responded to. The royal family did not announce its verdict. It simply stopped extending invitations. And that, if you have been paying attention to this institution for any length of time, is how it has always operated. Look, if you have been watching this from the beginning, if you notice the shift in Zara's body language at the Jubilee, if you felt something change in the atmosphere around those family moments years before it became undeniable on a guest list, your instincts were correct. You're not reading too much into it. You were reading it accurately. And what this week has given you is not new information. It is the documentation of what you already understood. The cascade does not stop here. That is what I need you to take from this. June the 6th is not the final signal. It is the first one visible enough to confirm in print what has been quietly true for years. And what comes next, what follows when the Earthshot trip happens without him, when Christmas passes without him, when the next major royal moment lands, and Harry and Meghan are standing in Montecito watching it on a screen, each of those moments will be another line in the same paragraph. The paragraph that began outside St. Paul's Cathedral in June of 2022, when Peter Phillips' cousin tried to start a conversation and the answer was silence. Watch the small signals, the seating chart at the next state occasion, the body language when a senior royal is asked in passing about their relationship with the Duke of Sussex, the order in which names are mentioned at the next public ceremony or not mentioned at all, the guest list for the next family wedding when it comes, and whoever is on it and whoever is not. These are not accidents. They are not oversights. They are not the result of busy schedules or administrative errors or the natural friction of a large extended family navigating complicated logistics. They are decisions made carefully, quietly, across years of assessment and recalibration in rooms the public will never see. And by the time they become visible, by the time they show up on a guest list or in a seating arrangement or in the absence of a particular name from a particular occasion, the decision is already settled, has been for some time. The royal family does not announce, it signals. And the signals this summer, if you are watching with any care at all, have been deafening. Meghan is in Montecito. Harry is not on the list. And if sources familiar with the trajectory of this situation are correct, what we are watching this month is the beginning of a season, not the end of one. The confirmation of a pattern that will not reverse itself because a brand launches or a documentary airs or an interview cycle begins again. Time in this institution is the only weapon that has ever truly mattered, and the people holding it are not in Montecito. The door to June the 6th has closed. Watch which one closes next. If this kind of analysis is useful to you, if it helps you make sense of a story that the mainstream coverage often flattens, I would be grateful if you subscribed. It costs nothing. It is the most direct way to make sure you are here when the next chapter of this unfolds. And I promise you, it will unfold.